Hello, everyone. You're welcome to class. I think it is the fourth class for this group, and we are moving on with learning Linux system administration. Today, we're going to be looking at user management. I shared the curriculum for Linux administration with us. If you will bring it up, and you go to the fifth page, you're going to see Article B, which is user management. And under that, we have users and groups, we have root and super users, and we have users, we have groups. Okay. So we're going to look at that today. And also, we'll also look at permissions. And if time permits, we'll jump into packages. Let's start with users and groups. On the Linux server, users and groups exist solely for access and permissions. Users and groups, they exist solely for access and permissions. Okay. Just like I showed us at the beginning, something similar, which is with our AWS account. Okay. The reason why we created IAM users was to control access. Okay. And then remember, we said that when you create IAM users, you add them to groups, and then they are limited, or they can be allowed to access so far what you allow the group to do. Okay. So also it is in Linux. In fact, AWS actually uh, simulated or modeled some things according to Linux pattern. Okay, because Linux existed way before AWS cloud platform. So when you are running a process, it will run as the owner of that process. All right. From your screen, from what you're seeing currently, who is the signed in user? Hello, everyone. Are you able to see my Themius?
Yes.
Okay, so who is signed in? Who's the user that is currently signed in at the moment?
Ubuntu.
Thank you, Ubuntu. Is there anyone in class who is still struggling to know what this shell prompt represents? Okay, if there's anyone like that, you just might want to quickly look at the first two classes. So Ubuntu is currently signed in. What it also means is if I run any process now and I run it as Ubuntu, I did not use sudo. Because if I use sudo, the narrative changes. We are coming to explain that in this class. If I run any process now, what it means is the owner of the process is this user. Let us list. Okay. If I create a directory now, or if I create an empty file, let's touch an empty file and call the file Onyinye, and I list. Look at Onyinye file. It is owned by Ubuntu, and the group access is also Ubuntu. Okay. The narrative changes if I run sudo make directory cletus, and I run, look at cletus, We just created this directory now. It is owned by root, and the group access is also owned by root. The same user or different ownership. What happened? I used sudo for this process. And any process you use sudo for, the owner of that process is root. And what sudo means, we'll talk about it when we are done with talking about users and groups now. Okay? So when you run a process, the owner of that process is the current signed in user. File access and ownership is also permission dependent. Okay? Access to file, ownership of files is also depending on the permission that you give to the file. Okay? And then you would not want any other user on your Linux server or Unix system to have access to some files owned by you, except if you are sharing such files. All right? Now, I've told us before, several, that each user on the Linux system has its own directory where their user-specific files are stored. And we know where user directories are. Anybody remember to tell us, where do we save user home directory? Anybody? And now I would expect that we'll just flip our notes and check these things. If you're not keeping notes, you might want to reconsider and start keeping notes from today. When you watch class videos, especially if you're a beginner, you should keep notes. Home directories are stored in root home. So if I cd to this place now, I expect to see the home directory of the users on the system, and you see Ubuntu. Okay. And don't forget, I told us home directories, primary groups, they bear the same name as the users. Okay. So each user has their own home directory where their user specific files get stored. Each user has their specific group as well in the group file. And we know where that is. It is in root etc. Okay. Now, system users have IDs, which is UIDs, user IDs, and we have GIDs, that is group IDs. And in real sense, these are the values that Linux uses to communicate with users and groups respectively, not the name that we give them. So this Ubuntu have its own UID. So also the primary group of Ubuntu, it has its own UID. And that's because this name may change tomorrow, but the ID does not change. Okay. So these IDs are what Linux use to manage users. Usernames are the human-friendly way to associate with users. When we get into the BUS, we'll talk about DHS, dynamic host names. Okay. But the system identify users by their UIDs. One similar example to that is your phone contacts on your phone. Okay. You know, when you save friends and families and associate contacts, you put different names, but the number does not change. Okay. What we should have actually been cramming is the number. And that's why we used to have electronic organizers in those days. I'm not sure they still make organizers today again because we now have smartphones. Okay. E-organizers in those days are for us to store uh, phone contacts. Okay. And then the idea is that so we can have human-friendly names that can be easily remembered. So when I'm looking for Shegun's mom, I just need to search Shegun's mom. I don't have to remember the digits. Okay. So that's how it is on Linux server and even in DNS as well. There are identification numbers for users, for groups, and that helps the system to communicate with them. The human readable ones are for us to be able to relate with them, not the machine that needs them. So that's that about users and groups. Let's talk about root. I've been saying I'll come and tell you about sudo, and now we are here. Okay. One of the most important users is root. And we say if it were to be Windows operating system or Android, we call them administrators. Okay. Root and super user. Root is the most powerful user on the system. I told us that before. Root can access any file, it can start any process, it can terminate any process. Root is the most powerful. It's like the owner of the system. Are you with me, everyone? Hello, are we together?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, thank you. And because of that, it is dangerous to operate or to run your PC, your server as root. Okay, sudo su. I'm signed in as root. Now, if you look before the @ sign, you see root here. As I am now, or as this system is right now, it is the most powerful. All right. And what that also means is it is also most vulnerable. There is no check whatsoever, no permission denied. Whatever you do now, signed in as root, will get done. Okay. So it is dangerous to operate as root all the time. You can potentially remove system critical files. If I cd to Etsy, Etsy folder is a system folder, and all the files here are system files. No files here can be joked with or you can play around. You don't bullshit around this folder specifically. See, but as I'm signed in as root, I can delete some of these files. And if I delete them, I've messed with smooth running of this Linux server. If I were to sign in as any other user apart from root, I'll get permission denied on the first attempt, except if I use sudo. Okay. But one thing about root is you don't get permission denied. You enter the command once, the command is correct, boom, it runs the command for you. Okay. So good practice or best practice is that you do not work as root, especially when you do your day-to-day dealings as server administrator, either cloud server or on-prem server. Luckily, if root access is needed and a user needs to do things as root, they can run a command as root instead. So what we are saying is if there is a process that requires root permission, let's say I need to install a special package. Okay, just like the way you go to Google and download things uh on your PC, either Mac OS or Windows OS. You download desktop, WhatsApp, you download your Zoom app, you download things. The same way, if you want to download and install services and packages on Linux, regular users cannot do that. It is the sole right of root. Now, we said that you don't operate as root most of the time so that you don't put your system in the harm's way. What then do? You can elevate a regular user to a super user. Okay, so what that means is that user can now use the sudo command. And I told us sudo means super user do. SU do. Okay, so they can run a command as root instead with the sudo command. All right. So to be able to use sudo, such user or any user that wants to use sudo would definitely be declared in the sudo file. Okay. And this is where we begin to show us some little difference between the different or among the different distros of Linux. Okay. When we get to adding the user to sudoers file, I will show you shortly. So Linux on AWS platform is on run level 5. I showed us that before. If I run woo flag R, run level 5. And run level 5 means that you can have multiple users on your Linux server. Okay. And if I have multiple users, they can have access to both GUI, graphics user interface, and command line interfaces, CLI. So what that means is on this Ubuntu server and also on this Amazon Linux server as well, I can have more than one users. And now I want to show you how to create users on the Linux server. Okay. So what will happen that you will need to create users? You've just been employed as an SRE, site reliability engineer, or a DevOps, okay, and then, or even a cloud administrator, and your new organization's applications are running on Linux servers, okay, either on-prem or in cloud. You need access to the company servers, either cloud administrator, site reliability engineer, uh, DevOps, associate architect, database engineer, right? You need access to the server. So apart from access to the AWS account, that is, if they are hosting the applications on the AWS account or any of the cloud platform, you also need access to these individual servers. So what would they do? They create user access for you. Okay. So on this Amazon Linux server now, let's see how to create users. It is simple. You only run sudo. Let me do it without sudo so you can see what I've been talking about. The command is user add the name of the user. Okay. User add the name of the user. So let's create for Bosse. You see, it says permission denied. That's because that command user add is not what a regular user can do. It is what it's a privilege for root only. But we are not signing in as root. Therefore, we add sudo. Adding sudo means that this user, EC2 user, is a sudoer. And how do you make a user a sudoer? I will show us shortly. So like that, we've created a user and then we call the name of the user Ose. Next thing we do is to give the user password. Okay, let's give the user password. And how do we do that? We say sudo password Ose. Now in Linux, when you are typing password, it won't show you anything, not even asterisk as you normally see in other interfaces. You just type in fill and then be sure of what you're typing, especially if you're using different cases. Okay, so I already entered the password. I use an English word, that's why it is calling it bad password. And now it says all authentication tokens updated successfully. I have created a user. The name of the user is Ose. So I once told us where to find all the users on the Linux server. Anybody remembers? Which file do we edit to see all the users on the Linux system? Did anybody remember? Okay.
Not the etc file.
No, it's obvious nobody has been keeping notes in this class.
Like under the
Is it LS?
No.
etc password file under the
Yeah,
etc code.
that's the password file, not the etc. etc is a folder, by the way, sir. We're good at
Yeah.
that. So yeah, so we cd into etc, and then if I list and I grep for password, that's it. Okay. So if I want to see, I can say cat password. Okay. Oh, my session terminated. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Let me just try to reconnect.